Today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named From Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a shot of a strange town where the sheriff Boyd walks around with a bell as evening approaches, reminding residents outside to hurry home. Customers in the restaurant, even if they haven't finished their meal, are hurried out by the staff because they're about to close. Everyone seems accustomed to staying indoors at night, tightly closing their doors and hanging charms on their windows. A man, having drunk too much at the tavern, doesn't return home yet, and his family anxiously waits for him. With nightfall approaching, they have no choice but to close their doors and shut all windows. As the wife checks downstairs for any oversights, their little girl, alone on the second floor, suddenly hears her grandma calling her from outside the window. Without hesitation, the girl opens the window, and her grandma smiles, saying she missed her so much. By the time her mother arrives upstairs, it's already too late. The next morning, the drunken man stumbles out of the tavern and returns home to find many neighbors gathered at his door. Boyd storms out of his house, cursing him as an irresponsible father. He then drags him upstairs where they find the gruesome sight of his daughter's lifeless body. The drunken father collapses in despair, sobbing uncontrollably. This is his misfortune and the town's nightmare. Boyd leaves the room, spots a fallen charm at the door, sighs, and pockets it. He then heads to the colony housing on the edge of town, the shared home to many homeless residents, including his son, Ellis. The father and son seem to have some unresolved issues, and an awkward atmosphere fills the air. Boyd invites his son to the funeral of the previous night's victim, but Ellis resists, claiming he's busy and doesn't want to go. The scene shifts to a man named Jim, who is driving an RV with his family to a lake for a vacation. They were initially excited about their upcoming journey, but their enthusiasm wanes when they encounter a fallen tree blocking their path. Jim and his family exit the vehicle to inspect the tree, but they are unable to move it. Suddenly, a crow lands on a nearby branch, followed by more crows gathering and circling above their heads. Jim's wife, Tabitha, grows increasingly uneasy and urges her husband to leave. Jim looks at the crows with confusion. He starts the vehicle, intending to find a detour to the lake, but the location is so remote that their phones have no signal. They have no choice but to continue on another road, eventually arriving at the eerie town. Abandoned, wrecked cars can be seen everywhere along the roadside, seemingly foreshadowing something ominous. The townspeople attending the funeral soon notice the two unfamiliar RVs, and all stare in their direction. As they see the strangers stop their vehicle, Boyd mutters under his breath, instructing everyone not to speak out of turn, as usual. Jim gets out of the car, intending to ask the residents for directions, but they all avoid him for unknown reasons. Only Boyd approaches Jim to strike up a conversation, telling him that if he follows the road straight ahead, he will reach the highway. Jim finds the people in this town very strange, and just wants to leave as soon as possible. The family drives on the only road through the eerie town, intending to cut straight across and get back on the highway. However, after driving for a while, they find themselves back in the town. Confused, Jim stops the car to ask for directions, but the townspeople walk away without saying a word. He has no choice but to continue driving forward. His wife suggests that they might have taken a wrong turn, so Jim becomes extra careful, constantly looking around. This time he is sure that the car is driving straight, but they still end up back in the town. Jim quickly turns the RV around to see if they can retrace their steps. Boyd, seemingly anticipating this, instructs his deputy Kenny to prepare their weapons. All the while, Tabitha insists that it's impossible and that he must have missed a turn. Suddenly, a car approaches from the opposite direction. Jim swerves to avoid it, and the RV veers off the road. After a while, Jim slowly regains consciousness. He is trapped by a tree branch and unable to move. He calls out his family members one by one, and only his daughter Julie responds. Jim starts to panic, praying that help will arrive soon. The situation in the other vehicle involved in the accident is slightly better. The injured driver gets out of the car and slowly walks forward. At this moment, Boyd and his deputy are setting up a spike strip. They have always used this method to put an end to the nightmare of out-of-town vehicles circling their town non-stop. When they see the injured driver approaching them, they realize there has been an accident. Boyd sends Kenny to take the injured person to the town's clinic while he runs towards the accident site. First, he sees the wrecked car and discovers another passenger inside. Considering the passenger's dazed appearance, Boyd concludes they must be on drugs. He handcuffs the injured person to the car, waiting for backup. Then he goes to the RV, assesses the condition of Jim's family, and climbs inside to help them out first. On the other side, Kenny took the injured person to the clinic and then drove to pick up the doctor, preparing to head to the accident site for reinforcements. On the way, they happened to run into Boyd's son, Ellis. They told Ellis that his father was rescuing people in the woods and needed help urgently. At first, Ellis was reluctant to go, but Kenny reminded him that it was getting dark, so he hastily got into the pickup truck. The group quickly arrived at the scene, first providing basic treatment for the injured man, and then swiftly went to the RV. By this time, Jim's wife and daughter had been rescued, and fortunately they were mostly unharmed, just a bit weak from the shock. But their son, Ethan, had been pierced by a table leg in his thigh. It would be impossible to transport him back to town in the short term. Spending the night in the woods would be as good as a death sentence. Boyd decided to take Jim and his family back to town, but Jim insisted he wouldn't leave his son behind. Boyd eventually compromised, allowing Jim to stay with his son while his weak wife and daughter had to go back with Kenny. After the others left, Boyd looked uneasily at the darkening sky. Fortunately, he had a protective charm he had found in a drunkard's house earlier that day. Carefully, he hung it on the RV's window. Jim looked at him, puzzled, and Boyd explained that it was for the RV's protection. Meanwhile, Kenny and Jim's family were on their way back to town. However, Kenny had forgotten about the spike strip he and Boyd had set up earlier that morning. With the sky already dark, they had no choice but to run towards a nearby colony house. Boyd, inside the RV, closed all doors and windows, anxiously looking outside. Gradually, several shadowy figures emerged from the depths of the woods, slowly approaching the RV like ghosts. Then, a knocking sound came from the door. Jim thought help had arrived and wanted to open the door, but Boyd held him tightly, yelling that they weren't human. If they opened the door, they would all be doomed. When the knocking stopped, Boyd finally let go of Jim, who stood there, stunned, not knowing what had just happened. On the other side, Kenny was leading Jim's family in a desperate run towards the colony house. The injured man named Jade accidentally fell to the ground, and Kenny had to help him along the way. They finally arrived at the front door, only to find it locked. The residents inside were also extremely nervous, and not opening the door at night was a deep-rooted warning for them. Ellis's girlfriend wanted to force the door open, but a burly man with a gun stopped her. Just in time, the house owner, Donna, appeared, shouting that they couldn't stand by and watch people die. At that moment, the people outside noticed several strange individuals approaching from around the corner. Julie recognized one of them as her boyfriend and wanted to approach him, but Kenny quickly pulled her back. Luckily, the door to the house opened just in time, and everyone rushed inside to safety. Donna noticed several unfamiliar faces in the crowd and yelled for them to get down on the ground. Jade fainted, while Julie and her mother were tied up by the others. Clearly, their crisis was far from over. In a separate room, Donna made sure that Jim's wife, Tabitha, had calmed down before untying her. She explained that this was a process every newcomer had to go through when arriving at the colony house. Then she began to tell Tabitha about the strange occurrences in the town, asking if she believed in the existence of the devil. Meanwhile, inside the RV, Jim was also curious about what those things outside were. Although they were no longer knocking on the door, it was evident that they were still lurking nearby. The doctor's emotions began to flare up, and she wanted to check if the charm was secure. Boyd quickly stopped her, warning her not to be fooled into doing anything foolish. It took some effort for the doctor to calm down, and Boyd advised her to focus all her energy on the child, ignoring everything else. This tactic seemed to work, and the creatures outside eventually left. The doctor began to remove the table leg from the child's body. Back at the colony house, Donna started recounting her own experiences. 3 years ago, she and her sister had encountered a fallen tree blocking the road. What was worse than Jim's family situation was that, by the time they reached the town, it was already dark. Donna watched helplessly as her sister was tortured to death by the devil in a brutal manner. She survived by hiding amidst the bushes, and later cleared out the colony house to provide shelter for other outsiders like herself, who were stranded in the town with nowhere to go. As for the origin of the devil, even the town's priest could not explain. However, as long as they kept doors and windows tightly closed at night and hung the charm by the window, the devil could not harm anyone. After the story, Tabitha had a hard time accepting its truth, but her subsequent experiences would change her perspective. In this eerie town of utter despair, where once you enter, there's no getting out, humans must stay indoors with doors and windows locked, or the devil will come to brutally slaughter people. With the help of the town's residents, Jim and his family managed to survive their first night after the car accident. The doctor also treated the injuries of their son, Ethan. The next morning, the family of 4 finally reunited, hugging each other tightly. It was clear that the previous night's experiences had brought them close to the brink of life and death. Afterward, Jim's family was temporarily placed in the colony house. Ethan caught a glimpse of a smiling boy outside the window, signaling that their nightmare had just begun. Moreover, the town was not only home to the terrifying devil. Kenny, who had escorted Tabitha and her daughter to the colony house the night before, did not return to the clinic to accompany his father, who suffered from dementia. When he arrived the next day, he found the clinic's door wide open, the charm on the ground. As expected, the clinic was in complete disarray, with the nurse and Kenny's father both gruesomely killed in the room. Kenny held his deceased father weeping in agony. Rewinding to one day earlier, after Kenny sent the injured driver from the car accident back to the clinic, he hurried off to rescue Jim's family. The only nurse who had to look after Kenny's father asked the waitress Sarah from the town's restaurant to help care for the patients. Little did they know that this seemingly innocent girl was actually a psychotic killer. Without any reason, she killed the driver, and afterward she appeared genuinely remorseful. She confessed everything to her brother, but to cover up the murder, she did something even more horrifying. After the nurse had settled Kenny's father, she found the clinic's door wide open and the smiling devil walking in. Now, the mastermind, Sarah, was at home, constantly confessing to her brother that she shouldn't have killed the driver or opened the clinic's door. Heartbroken, Kenny ran into the woods to make a chessboard, his father's favorite, as a tribute. Boyd tried to console him, but Kenny was consumed by resentment. He noticed that the devils always seemed calm before they killed, as they knew that people had very limited places to go. Clearly, Kenny began to harbor thoughts of resisting the devil. His words deeply moved Boyd, whose wife had also met a tragic end at the hands of the devil. On the other side, Jim's family had to sleep on the floor in the colony house. The living conditions were indeed incomparable to what they had before, but Jim was optimistic, always able to play and have fun with his son. However, Julie seemed to reject the atmosphere at home, preferring to get along well with the people in the colony house instead. Jade, the man who had been injured in the car accident, finally woke up. As usual, Donna told him about the terrifying aspects of the town, the inability to escape, and the murderous monsters that appeared at night. After hearing Donna's story, Jade thought it must be an elaborate prank orchestrated by his traveling companions and the travel company. He believed it was a real-life escape room. Donna was speechless as she watched Jade, who enthusiastically shouted about finding clues and completing the mission to escape the town. To him, everyone in the town was a character in his own story, and he could do whatever he wanted. However, the restaurant owner, Kenny's mother, wouldn't indulge him. Even Sarah, the psychopathic killer working at the restaurant, couldn't understand the comical man in front of her. That afternoon, the priest sought out Jim's family, saying that newcomers to the town had to participate in a selection ceremony. They had to decide whether to live in the colony house or in the town itself, as once they made a choice, they couldn't change their minds. The priest intended to take them for a walk around the town, explaining the rules as they went. In the evenings, they had to stay indoors, hang up amulets, and lock their doors and windows. Tabitha couldn't understand why the residents could act as if nothing had happened, despite the terrifying events in the town. The priest said that given enough time, humans could accept any irrational existence, and even consider it a part of life. Tabitha then noticed an iron shed and asked its purpose. The priest explained that it was used to punish criminals who had violated the rules and caused the death of townspeople. The offender would be made to stay inside the shed without an amulet for one night. Tabitha asked how many times the iron shed had been used, and the priest said that tonight would be the first time, with the drunkard in the police station being the one to be punished. Because he was drunk and didn't go home the night before, his wife and child were tragically killed by the devil. His actions violated Boyd's rule of spending the night at home, and thus he had to face this punishment. At that moment, the drunkard was full of regret. He hadn't always been like this. Boyd knew that the punished drunkard wouldn't survive the night, so he asked if there were any unfulfilled wishes he had. The drunkard requested to visit a place where he and his deceased daughter used to swing, hoping Boyd would bury him with his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, the house vacated by the drunkard could potentially become Jim's family's new residence. After the priest introduced them to the events that had taken place 2 nights prior, Tabitha still struggled to accept it. She wasn't repulsed by the bloodstains throughout the house, but rather, she was disgusted by the town's rules and methods. She wondered why no one blamed the real culprits, instead of subjecting the house's owner to the same fate as his wife and daughter. She thought the townspeople's thinking was absurd. Having experienced the horrors of the devil up close in the trailer the night before, Jim believed that their only option was to adapt to this place. Otherwise, they'd end up like the drunkard's family. After hearing this, Tabitha reluctantly agreed. Boyd also sensed the decay of the town. He went to the church to find the priest, expressing that he couldn't bring himself to lock the drunkard inside the iron shed. Unexpectedly, the priest scolded Boyd, saying that the rules were set by him to deter other residents. If the drunkard wasn't punished, more people would break the rules. Boyd was furious, saying that they shouldn't just watch as a man who had just lost his wife and child was to be killed by the devil. The priest replied that for the sake of the town's safety, Boyd had no choice. Disappointed, Boyd sighed and walked away. He went to the shed to experience the feeling of sitting inside. The small, confined space nearly suffocated him, and he finally made up his mind. He ran to the police station, gave the drunkard an amulet, and told him about a small cabin in the forest where he could lay low. Soon, the selection ceremony for Jim's family began. This was the most important event in the town, presided over by the highly respected priest. Newcomers had to choose between living in the town, following the rules, and living a structured life, or living in the relatively relaxed colony house. Boyd stepped forward, saying that there was room for adjustment regarding the rules of the iron shed, implying that he wanted to pardon the drunkard's punishment. But just then, the drunkard appeared before everyone, holding the amulet. Instead of fleeing to the forest as Boyd had suggested, he came to make a heartfelt confession. Every Christmas he used to buy gifts for his daughter, but everything changed after they moved to the town. Now, all he wanted was to see his wife and child again. After returning the amulet to Boyd, the drunkard said that he was willing to accept his punishment. Suddenly, laughter disrupted the scene. It was the comical Jade who thought the drama arranged for him was simply brilliant, and that the travel company had gone all out. Boyd, somewhat speechless, carried Jade and made him choose. Without much thought, Jade picked up a stone representing the town. Boyd then threw him out of the ceremony. Next, it was Jim's family's turn to choose. Boyd asked each of them for their choice. Jim, Tabitha, and their son Ethan chose to live in the town, while their daughter Julie chose the colony house. Tabitha hurriedly said that she had made a mistake, but Julie insisted that she hadn't. Donna cheered for Julie, and the scene immediately became chaotic. Boyd shouted to regain control and began to console Jim and Tabitha. He told them that he lived in the town, but his son Ellis lived in the colony house, and he would help look after Julie. The priest seized the opportunity to finalize the decision as the sun was about to set. The selection ceremony was completed, and everyone hurried home. Not far away, Kenny wanted to make Jade realize the situation. He told Jade that his driver friend had been killed by the demon the night before. Jade wondered if this was some sort of branching storyline, but his doubts were shattered when Kenny took him to see his friend's lifeless body. Jade was devastated. As evening approached, all the townspeople gathered near the iron shed. Boyd opened the door, and with everyone watching, the drunkard slowly walked into the shed. After locking the door, Boyd left without even looking at the priest beside him. Night was about to fall, and the restaurant closed on schedule. Jim, Tabitha, and Ethan moved into their new home in the town. He didn't forget the town's rules, and he locked the doors and windows and hung up the amulets. Meanwhile, a party was being held in the colony house to celebrate the arrival of their newest member, Julie. The colony house was more lively than the town, and perhaps Julie's choice wasn't wrong after all. In the town's houses, Boyd couldn't help but peek out, wanting to check on the drunkard's condition in the iron shed. The scene in the colony house was a stark contrast to the drunkard in the confined space. Soon there was a commotion outside, and the drunkard looked out to find the vicious demon approaching. The accumulated fear over the years made the man tremble as he desperately awaited his doom. It was a hopeless situation for this man, all because he got drunk and didn't return home all night, leaving his wife and child vulnerable. They failed to lock their doors and windows, allowing the demon to break in and brutally kill them. According to the town's rules, the man was to be locked in the iron shed for one night, which means exactly a sacrifice made to the devil. Early the next morning, the town's sheriff arrived near the iron shed with a cart. Taking a deep breath, he loaded the pieces of the mutilated body onto the cart. After covering the remains with a tarp, Boyd pulled the cart towards the church. Jim and his family gradually began to accept their new life in the town. They spent their first night in a town residence house, which was an incredibly agonizing night for Tabitha. Although no demon visited them, she couldn't sleep at all. She knew that the house they were staying in used to belong to the recently deceased drunkard and his family. Tabitha knew that she could never truly fit into this town. At this time, their son Ethan came over and said he was hungry. According to the town's rules, they could dine for free at the local restaurant. As they left their house, they ran into Boyd. Ethan asked what was inside the cart. Boyd replied that it was just some supplies and reminded them to hurry if they wanted breakfast, as it was only available during specific times. The restaurant was already packed with people. However, as newcomers, Jim and his son were given reserved seats by the restaurant owner. The strange woman, Sarah, didn't show any signs of distress and enthusiastically served the father and son. Ethan said he wanted to eat pancakes, which was considered quite a luxury for the townspeople. Sarah didn't dare to agree on the spot, saying she would have to ask the kitchen first. Boyd took the body to the church, instructing the priest to bury the drunkard and his family together, as it was his last wish. Boyd couldn't forgive the priest for insisting on punishing the drunkard. Sensing this, the priest approached Boyd, who was fixing the iron shed, trying to bridge the gap between them. The priest knew the importance of Boyd to the town. It was Boyd who discovered the talisman and maintained the town's safety, allowing the residents to return to a normal life. However, Boyd seemed to have paid a heavy price. His wife likely died as a result. The restaurant owner carefully prepared delicious pancakes for Ethan. The little boy looked satisfied and asked his father if they were going to stay here forever. Jim replied that they were only staying temporarily and would definitely leave later. Although he appeared relaxed, he soon couldn't hold back his tears anymore. Excusing himself to the restroom, Jim began to sob, overwhelmed by the recent events and his worries for the future. Meanwhile, as Ethan enjoyed his pancakes, he met a strange friend named Victor, who lived in the colony house. Victor was said to be one of the earliest people trapped in the town. He was a solitary man, often locking himself in his room and drawing peculiar pictures. One day, he noticed that the forest seemed to be getting closer to the colony house. Just as he tried to measure the distance with his footsteps, he happened to meet Ethan, who was taking a walk. Ethan asked him if he had seen a boy in white clothes. Victor was surprised and was about to say something when Ethan's sister appeared, interrupting their conversation. Victor came to find Ethan this time to ask if the boy in white he mentioned looked like the one in his drawing. After looking at the drawing, Ethan nodded. Victor's face turned grim. At this moment, Jim walked out of the restroom and saw the eerie drawing of the boy in Victor's hands. Thinking that Victor might harm his son, Jim angrily threw him out of the restaurant. Ethan was upset, feeling that his father had hurt his friend. When they got home, he refused to talk to his father. Meanwhile, another newcomer, Jade, was now deep in thought, but he believed he could leave the strange town. He took Kenny into an underground storage room because he had seen a strange symbol on the ceiling and a corpse in a cabinet while searching for treasure the day before. But today, everything had changed. He believed this was an important clue to leave the town, but Kenny thought it was just a hallucination due to his tension in this new environment. Many newcomers had the same reaction, but Jade insisted that he could tell the difference between reality and illusion. After all, he used to be the boss of a software company. Kenny, failing to persuade him, decided to show him something. In the police station, Kenny pointed to a map and said that the people in the town came from all over the country. They seemed to be teleported and gathered here mysteriously. Now, no matter what happened, he wouldn't be surprised. Jade suddenly laughed, saying that someone must be behind all this, and he would find the answer. Kenny said many people were like him at first, but they ended up going crazy or dying. Those who survived chose to accept everything irrational. Suddenly, a walkie-talkie nearby rang. Kenny said this happened often. Jade quickly moved the walkie-talkie away, thinking it might provide a clue. Jim's daughter, Julie, had just woken up on the living room sofa. She saw a strange man sitting in front of her and learned that he was drawing her portrait. However, she still felt uneasy. Then another guest came to greet her and without asking put on Julie's shirt. Julie didn't say anything but was obviously unhappy. She now regretted leaving her parents to live here alone. Fortunately, there were still some normal people, such as Ellis's girlfriend, Fatima. After hearing about Julie's morning ordeal, the girl took her to the Colony House laundry area and said that she could help out there to retrieve her clothes and choose from some unclaimed ones. At this time, Julie's mother, Tabitha, appeared to deliver a sweater and tried to persuade her daughter to move back to the town with her. This upset Julie, who pointed out her parents were getting divorced. It turned out that the road trip was a pre-divorce journey agreed upon by Jim and Tabitha, but Julie had found out. The mother and daughter's conversation ended on a sour note. Later, Tabitha happened to meet Jim in the yard, who was also not on good terms with their son. As a result, the two found an outlet for their frustrations and started arguing again, not noticing the strange man. Victor came to see Ethan again, wanting to take him to find the boy in white. He also picked up a wooden stick to replace his cane, saying it was better for adventuring. And so the two entered the forest from the backyard. Victor had been living in the area for many years and was very familiar with the surroundings. They quickly discovered the fleeting figure of the boy in white, deep in the forest. Victor brought Ethan to the tree hollow where the boy had disappeared, seemingly knowing many secrets. Victor drew a smiley face on a stone and threw it into the hollow. Not long after, the stone fell from the sky, the very same one that had been thrown into the hollow. Victor said that humans could be teleported by magical forces too, but the destination was uncertain and could be far away. Suddenly, there was a noise from the tree hollow. Victor sensed something was wrong and decided to take Ethan away from there. Back in town, Jim and Tabitha returned home after their argument and noticed that their son was missing and that his cane was left in the backyard. This suggested that he might have gone into the forest, so the couple rushed to look for him. They reached the depths of the woods and suddenly encountered a bad-tempered dog barking. Strangely, despite not being far apart, they couldn't see each other, as if it's a space-time dislocation. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Victor appeared and scared the dog away with a shot. Although Jim saw his wife and son, he was still furious, convinced that Victor had brought Ethan there. Seeing this, Victor was frightened and fled. When he returned home, he rummaged through his things and found a drawing of a dog, identical to the one in the forest. Victor suddenly remembered his own childhood when he first came to the small town, and saw the boy in white walking with a dog among the corpses in the town. He wasn't scared, and even greeted the boy. Now it seemed that every drawing Victor made had actually happened. Upon returning home, Jim immediately sought Boyd, and told him that Victor might have harmed his son. However, Boyd replied that Victor was part of the colony house, and he had no authority to intervene. He could only negotiate with Donna, the person in charge of the colony house. Feeling guilty, Boyd invited Jim's family to dinner as a formal welcome. He even dressed up for the occasion. Once again, the radio suddenly turned on by itself. Boyd was no longer surprised by this. At that moment, the waitress Sarah suddenly felt an unbearable pain in her arm, followed by veins surfacing one by one, forming the words, "Kill the boy." Not long after, the text disappeared, but Sarah's ordeal didn't end. She suddenly fell to the ground and started convulsing violently. With the help of Fatima, Julie finally got her own independent space. She was working hard to adapt to the environment here and wanted to blend in. However, some people still knew that this place was not suitable for living and were trying their best to escape. Victor, who knew more about the truth, was digging something at the moment, and everyone in the colony house was looking at him in confusion. Donna ran over and asked him what he was doing. Victor replied that he just wanted to be prepared this time, feeling as if he was digging his own grave. He probably sensed that disaster was about to befall the town. After Sarah's convulsion, her brother seemed to guess something and quickly ran towards the clinic. However, Sarah had already improved by then. The town's only doctor didn't find anything wrong, but still asked her to stay in the clinic for observation overnight. Strangely, Sarah repeatedly emphasized that she didn't want to see her brother. At this time, the town's sheriff also walked in, wanting to find out why Sarah suddenly had a seizure. 6 months ago, similar cases had occurred in the town, and he was very concerned, wondering if it was caused by the town's environment. However, the doctor reassured Boyd that there was no such possibility. What they needed to focus on now was how to persuade Sarah's brother to leave so that the patient could rest. Boyd took on this task and stopped the brother at the hospital entrance, saying that Sarah was already resting and asked him to come back tomorrow morning. Seeing that he insisted on going in, Boyd asked if they were hiding something from him. Unexpectedly, this casual remark made the brother nervous, and he left after a few stammering words. In fact, Sarah had indeed done something terrible, so it was no wonder the brother was so nervous. She had once killed the injured driver lying in the clinic with her own hands. In order to cover up her crime, she opened the clinic's door to let the demon in, which ultimately led to the tragic death of the clinic's nurse and Kenny's father. Although the brother didn't participate, he helped keep the secret for his sister. However, today's strange occurrence made the brother worry that his sister might kill again. Inside the clinic, Sarah looked at the scalpel in front of her and hesitated once more. She believed that the words showing up on her hand were a revelation from the gods. As long as she did as instructed, everyone in the town could leave this cursed place. Presumably, the previous murder also had the same purpose. However, this time the target was a child. Sarah found herself in a dilemma. She asked the doctor if she would do something terrible if it meant everyone could leave the town. After some thought, the doctor felt that she could do it since everyone would benefit. These words finally helped Sarah make her choice. The next day, Sarah had spent a peaceful night at the clinic. As she stepped outside, she ran into her brother, who was anxiously waiting for her. He was worried that his sister might do the same thing again, but Sarah refused to reveal anything. This made her brother even more worried. Meanwhile, the family of Ethan, who was oblivious to the impending disaster, was also contemplating how to leave the town. The clueless father, Jim, decided to try everything to figure the answer out. In no time, they had filled a wall with various questions. Jim believed that if they found all the answers, they would definitely be able to leave. However, Tabitha disagreed. The other people in the town had pondered over the same questions, and they were still trapped there. In fact, there was another question that everyone had overlooked. Jim asked her to write it down, but Tabitha shook her head, saying she didn't dare write it down and didn't want to know the answer. At this point, Sarah had already taken a scalpel and arrived alone at Ethan's house. After meeting his parents, she said that she had hit it off with Ethan and wanted to take him out to play. The little boy didn't have many friends here and was naturally overjoyed. However, Sarah realized that this wasn't a good place to carry out her plan. She then suggested taking Ethan to her brother's farm to see the goats. Tabitha wanted to come along, but Sarah immediately said that she could take him alone. Tabitha, however, insisted on accompanying them. Meanwhile, Sarah's brother wanted to find the priest to confess and relieve his stress. When he discovered that the priest wasn't at the church, he searched the town and finally found the priest deep in thought in the wilderness. He told the priest that he had something terrible to confess, and asked if he could ensure that the secret would be kept forever. The priest said that only the two of them and God would know. However, when he learned about Sarah's devilish deeds, he was completely taken aback. The priest told her brother that keeping a secret was one thing, but Sarah could pose a threat to the safety of other people in the town. They had to find her immediately. So the two searched the town, and finally learned at the restaurant that she had gone to the ranch with Ethan and his mother. Sarah and the others had already been at the ranch for quite some time. As expected, there were many small animals there, and Ethan was having a great time. Sarah told Tabitha that the town had several emergency shelters in case someone got stranded outside at night, and there was one at the ranch that she wanted to show her. Without any suspicion, Tabitha followed Sarah into a warehouse, which had a separate room inside. As Tabitha was looking around at the entrance, she was suddenly pushed in with great force. Sarah locked the door from the outside, saying it was all for everyone's sake. Then she took out a scalpel and silently approached Ethan, feeling guilty about what she was about to do. However, she believed it was the only way for everyone to escape the town. Just as Sarah was about to act, her brother arrived in time and tried to persuade her to stop. Ethan seized the opportunity to run away when Sarah was distracted. Her brother held on to Sarah, but in the next moment, the knife accidentally injured him. Sarah never expected this to happen and crouched on the ground, crying. The priest, who had just arrived, looked at the scene in shock. Soon the townspeople gathered, having heard the news. Jim heard his wife's cry for help from inside the warehouse and rushed to open the door. Tabitha frantically searched for her son. Little did she know that Ethan had run to the nearby colony house and found his sister Julie, who was playing outside. The doctor confirmed by the side of Sarah's brother's body that there was no way to save him from his injuries. The priest shook his head, and it turned out that Sarah had run into the woods. This made Jim's family even angrier, fearing that their son Ethan might be in danger again. Boyd assured them that he would handle Sarah if she returned before dark, and if she didn't, it meant she was already dead. The conversation only made Jim angrier. He felt that there were too many monsters in the town, which further strengthened his family's desire to escape. Tabitha picked up a pen and wrote down the question she had been afraid to ask, that if they really did survive the car accident. The implication was that the people in the town might not actually be alive in this world. The desire to leave the town wasn't limited to Jim's family. Jade was also looking for answers. He had an even bigger idea, planning to explore the situation from the perspective of relativity and parallel universes. Unfortunately, he didn't make any progress after thinking for a long time. Later, he accidentally walked into a room with an old walkie-talkie in hand and was astounded by the scene inside. He wondered why there was really a bar in this rundown place. The bar owner said that what the people here needed most was alcohol, so he opened a bar. Jade curiously picked up a glass of alcohol and took a sip, but immediately spat it out. Due to limited resources, the owner had no choice but to use the cheapest potatoes to make the alcohol. As a result, Jade despised the place even more, believing that those who came here to drink were like rats in a maze, only seeking temporary satisfaction. He scolded the people, asking if they had ever considered finding a way out, but no one paid any attention to him. The bar owner stopped Jade, saying that he would become like them in time, but Jade's desire to leave was strong. He had just acquired a technology company outside, and hadn't even had the chance to make money from it yet. The bar owner then told Jade that they were like Schrodinger's cat, trapped in a box. Before the box was opened, people outside wouldn't know whether they were dead or alive. He suggested that if Jade could fix the walkie-talkie and let people outside know they were alive, everyone would surely be saved. This idea greatly inspired Jade, who never thought the answer could be so simple. Boyd was also thinking about how to escape the town, not only for himself, but also to fulfill his late wife's last wish. He took some time off with his deputy and went to his wife's tombstone to pour out his worries. The recent string of deaths in the town made him feel that there wasn't much time left for everyone. Perhaps soon, the town would face a devastating blow. At this point, he had an idea for a way to escape the town, but the risk was too great, and it could lead to the doom of the town and everyone's death. Boyd was now hesitating, unsure whether to proceed. His wife used to make decisions for him when he was confused, and now he still yearned for a sign. While searching for a sign, he happened to encounter the guilt-ridden doctor, who felt that her conversation the night before had led Sarah to harm Ethan. Boyd kept reassuring her that it wasn't her fault, reminding her that she had saved the boy's life just a few days ago. At that moment, the radio on the table chimed in again, and Boyd suddenly realized that the sign he was looking for had arrived. On Jade's side, after getting a hint from the bar owner, he decided to repair the radio in the police station to establish contact with the outside world. Fortunately, there were many old cars